There is a big kind of current at the moment that is trying to push us down the route of greater and greater centralized governance, central bank digital currencies, digital ID, this kind of push towards net zero policy, this attack on farming, all this stuff that's being pushed by governments who are, or politicians who are aligned, have been indoctrinated in this kind of like World Economic Forum kind of dogmatic view of how they want the future to be. There's a real problem with people not seeing the dangers because they're kind of blinded by the perceived convenience of this stuff. What would you say if in 10 years' time, you wouldn't be able to spend cash? You know, every transaction, every penny that goes in and out of your bank account is going to be monitored by the government, and you're not going to be able to have any kind of privacy or ability to choose how you spend your money. You know, you're being pushed down this road where you're completely and utterly dependent on the state and dependent on large corporations who are aligned with the state. Before you know it, you can be in a very dangerous situation where you have no kind of recognizable freedom.
Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. In this episode, I spoke with Matt Gubba. Matt is an award-winning CEO and founder of the commercial finance brokerage BizBritain, which has helped fund thousands of UK small businesses. More recently, Matt has become a major voice in the freedom movement in the UK and is now the founder of the International Liberty Forum, which seeks to raise awareness about the ever-increasing power and influence exerted by governments and supranational NGOs. I've known about Matt for a while and wanted to get him on the podcast, but I was waiting till the right time, and it ended up not being the right time because, as has happened with several of my other guests previously, as soon as I recorded the episode, he was banned from Twitter. So unfortunately, Matt won't be able to share out the episode. So I'm going to need you guys to help me out with a bit of the footwork there. I really appreciate that Matt has risked a lot in order to be a big voice for freedom. He was already a public figure before 2020, and since then has gone against the grain of most public figures and has been a consistent voice for truth and freedom. If you enjoyed the episode, please give it a like and a share on social media. Let's really get this episode out there and combat the ongoing censorship we're seeing. If you're enjoying the podcast so far, please give it a 5-star rating in whichever podcast app you're using. If you're new here, welcome. Give the podcast a subscribe for future episodes. If you want to donate to the podcast, that can be done in 2 ways. The first is via Bitcoin tips, both on-chain and Lightning. Just check the link in the description. And you can give a fiat donation with Buy Me a Coffee as well. Tips are hugely appreciated and will go directly towards the costs of running the show. And I want to give a special shout out to my girlfriend as well, who recently bought 10 coffees on Buy Me a Coffee as a birthday gift and also to show her support for the show. She's been a consistent supporter of the podcast since I've started doing this, so I won't share her name here, but I just want her to know that the support means the world to me. All right, let's get into the episode. All right, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So I don't know too much about you other than your Twitter presence, which you've obviously got a very big following there and particularly a following amongst the freedom community. But yeah, I haven't heard too much about your background and kind of upbringing and how you kind of came to be this voice of the resistance. So why don't you share that a little bit?
Sure. So I'll start with my kind of professional background, and because that's really the key thing that led me into the freedom movement as of late. So prior to all the Twitter stuff and the social media stuff, I founded a commercial finance brokerage about 10 years ago. So end of 2012, beginning of 2013. And we help small businesses and pre-start entrepreneurs secure financing to start a business or to grow a business. So over the last decade, I've kind of been working with lots of small businesses and helped probably about 5,000 small businesses in various forms now, anything from plumbers and shopkeepers, hairdressers, all sorts of stuff, kind of real grassroots businesses, help them to start up. And then obviously 2020 came along and all the COVID stuff and all the kind of business closures, and the restrictions. And it kind of just became an all out assault on the people and the businesses that I'd spent the last 10 years kind of like putting my heart and soul into helping. And obviously, being a business owner myself as well, there's just all sorts of reasons why I just wasn't, happy with what was being done by, our government and other governments around the world and the kind of tack that was being taken and this kind of, no consideration for any kind of collateral damage of the lockdowns and the kind of always restrictions that were being placed on people. So that was kind of what got me speaking out originally about all the kind of stuff that we speak about now in the freedom movement. And obviously that led on to founding something called the International Liberty Forum, which is kind of my attempt to kind of push back against the kind of the wider narrative that's, been unfolding, the globalist narrative with the World Economic Forum and all that kind of stuff. But just to kind of, I suppose, give it a bit of punctuation, I think I've always been a rebel, ever since I was, at school age. And I don't think there's ever been a time where I haven't kind of had a desire to kind of push back against authority and kind of find ways to kind of live a life that's not, I guess, I suppose, want of a better term, a free life. I've always sought out ways in which I can have control over my own time, and my comings goings. I've never been able to, I've never been one to be able to stick long term with a job. And that's one of the reasons why I went into starting my own business. I couldn't deal with working for other people and being told what to do. So I've always had this kind of, burning desire to kind of be to be free. So that's kind of a bit about my background.
Okay, cool. So would you consider yourself a libertarian then?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah. So this is something you've grown up with. This isn't something, it sounds to me like this isn't something that kind of came about purely off the COVID stuff. It sounds like you were already kind of predisposed to that. And then, you obviously just kind of applied that to the latest tyranny, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, very much so. I think I suppose if I had to try and trace back to like where this kind of mindset started with me, I think it was probably when I was about 12. I basically got hit by a car. I was on my way, random story, but I was on my way to school. And at that time I was I was always quite worried about being well behaved and being on time. I went to quite a strict boys' school. And I was effectively like rushing, so I was worried about being late, and ran across the road without looking properly and just got completely wiped out by a car that was going at reasonable speed. And it wasn't just like a tap and you fall over and get up. I was, knocked unconscious, broke my leg, cracked a vertebrae in my neck, had to go in, an ambulance. It was quite a serious thing. And I was told that if I'd stepped out maybe a second sooner, I probably would have died. And I think ever since then, it kind of changed my mindset a lot. And I always just taken the attitude that I kind of, from that point onwards, I kind of refused to rush for anyone or be kind of, be put under pressure by anyone, because it kind of just showed like how fragile life was in a lot of ways. And I kind of decided from that point, I very much kind of wanted to live life on my terms.
Wow, that's really interesting. Because, I think that most people wouldn't have such a defined moment for where they kind of like, I guess, change their ideology or something. But I can completely understand that, an event like that would definitely make you think, you're rushing to get to school on someone else's clock, they have the authority over you. And an event like that just makes you think, why am I, this wasn't important enough for me to risk my life, but I felt like I needed to. I guess that just gives you a shake and, makes you think like just obeying authority, is a deadly thing to do.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can still remember like lying like alone in the hospital, like with sandbags tied to either side of my head, and having like cuts all over my body and stuff, and thinking, why was I so worried about being 2 minutes late to school? Was it worth this? And it's quite a bizarre thing to look back on, actually. But I think it really, and that's what it really comes down to. Like I could never now put myself in a position where I'd, like you say, risk my life or because you don't realize I didn't realize I was at the time, but effectively that's what I was doing. I was risking my life to kind of like comply with someone else's authority and never again.
Wow. Okay. That's really interesting. So you've kind of come very much into prominence with everything going on around COVID. How did that story kind of start for you? Or were you already kind of big on Twitter and stuff before that? Because I think that's when I started following you, but I don't know whether you already had quite a following before this whole thing kicked off.
Yeah, so I've been using Twitter since 2010, I think. Okay. Maybe 2011. So I built a following of sorts over the kind of the 8 to 10 years. I can't remember if it was 2010, 2012 I joined, but I'd say my following's probably doubled. So I did have a reasonable following before that. However, it was around about it was probably the end of 2020. I think it was when they brought in the rule of 6 stuff in the UK, where you're only allowed to mix with 6 people at a time. And I was already fed up of everything, and I'd kind of been holding my tongue. And because in my situation as well, because I already had a following, I had lots of relationships with, companies and clients and businesses, you kind of worry what they're going to think. Or I was, at the time I was worried about, damaging my business and damaging, that kind of side of things. So I'd held my tongue, but it was something, I don't know what it was, but something just kind of snapped in my mind. I said, you know what, I'm just going to start calling all this stuff out online. And I saw other people were doing it. And it felt very lonely at first, to be honest with you. And it's quite a scary thing, because you kind of like, you spent years and years building up a reputation and, building relationships with, companies and stuff that you work with. And I did get a lot of pushback and a lot of flack in the beginning. I really did burn a lot of relationships. I got people, getting absolutely, infuriated with me, questioning this stuff, and I was being called like all the usual stuff, like you're a granny killer, and all this absolute vitriol being thrown at me. And it did end a few commercial relationships. There are some people now that I just don't deal with anymore, because they effectively just completely cut off any dealings with me. But the net effect has been very positive. I think for every relationship lost, I've built, probably twice as many new relationships. So I think it's been a positive thing. But it was, I think a lot of people have found the same, to be honest with you. I think there was a point when, there was almost like a tipping point where people started calling it out, wasn't there? I think it was kind of like in the latter half of 2020.
Mm-hmm. I think it was. I think that like really at the beginning or even during that kind of first lockdown, I mean, even myself, like, I became, the most ardent anti-lockdown that you could get. But like during that first lockdown, I didn't really express too much of a strong opinion about it. I wasn't really like for or against. My attitude was just kind of like, okay, like we don't know how bad this is going to be. We could have, at that point, as far as I was concerned, because I just hadn't really been following it enough, we could have been seeing bodies on the street and everything. And, I wouldn't have wanted to kind of be like really kind of like staking my claim saying, okay, well, this is absolutely wrong. Even though in retrospect, I still think that even if it had been way worse than it turned out to be, I still think on principle, I probably should have opposed it in the early days. But I guess I was somewhat reserved. I hadn't really sat down and thought about my opinion on everything kind of thoroughly. But yeah, you're right. I think for me, it was when they reintroduced masks. It was like, I think that was maybe like late April or May or something. It was kind of coming into the summer, and they were like, oh yeah, masks. And it just, something for me was like, okay, this isn't going away now. Like, unless we speak out, it's not going away. They're going to try and keep this thing going as long as possible. Yeah, you're right. Like it did seem to be that kind of like later half.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The masks thing was just crazy, wasn't it? It was almost like everything had kind of died down, and they'd got through all the worst of it or whatever, according to their numbers, without having any, this nonsense with the mandatory masking. And suddenly they brought it in, and it was mandatory, and you had to wear, they're telling you had to wear a mask. It was absolutely ludicrous. And I remember that well.
Yeah, 100%. And, it's interesting what you were saying about like, that once you kind of started speaking out, that you lost a few people who, business relationships and stuff, but then you gained a lot. And I found this is the case for a lot of people, like including myself, like going through this process of kind of having an opinion and being like, okay, everyone, or not everyone, but like a large amount of people, like a majority of people, at least at that point, disagree with me, kind of like with a lot of passion, basically. It did seem like a kind of lonely thing it felt lonely, and it also felt kind of like, I guess, somewhat of a scary thing to do, to kind of just be an outlier like that. But, for me, I didn't really hesitate too much about it. As soon as I was like, okay, this is what I believe the truth to be, I didn't want to kind of shy away from it. I was like, okay, it's uncomfortable that, in a way I'd kind of, it'd be nice to be blue pilled and not have to face that, not have to face dealing with that truth and living up to it. But once you actually kind of go with that, sometimes it can be very rewarding. And, I've spoken to a lot of people on this podcast, and, same for me personally. Like, I've actually found it a very rewarding experience kind of going through that. And especially now that the rest of the world is kind of catching up in a way. Like now it's like everyone kind of knows, everyone kind of knows that they were duped, but, hasn't necessarily said it. They've not necessarily kind of like come out and made a big hoo-ha about it. But I think everyone secretly knows like they were duped. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree. Yeah. I mean, there are going to be people, let's face it, there are going to be people who will, although they know deep down that they were duped, they will never admit it. They will scream, oh, lockdowns were great until they're blue in the face. And that's just going to be the way it is. But I agree. I think everyone knows now at this point that things weren't as they were made out to be. Things were exaggerated. Things were twisted. There was a lot of duping going on. I don't think even the most kind of ardent Covidian, double masker, whatever, want to call them, could
quad backs.
Exactly, could deny at this point that everything was as they said. But as you say that, I guess, some of us, I guess have our minds work differently. It's this. I can't remember what the word is for it now. There's a mass formation psychosis.
Yes.
Some of us just weren't susceptible to it, were we? And I think there are, I guess, a 20% or whatever the percentage is. I can't remember what the numbers were, but some of us just weren't susceptible to all that.
Yeah. What do you think that comes down to? Because I love asking this question. Everyone seems to have a different answer.
What do I think it comes down to? I don't know really. Because it's one of those things, isn't it? Like if you look at like hypnosis, some people just aren't susceptible to hypnosis. I don't know whether it's the way that our minds work or whether it's something that's more in the way that we not necessarily that we were raised, but in the way in our based on our own experiences of life that's made us more skeptical and made us kind of more. I'd like to think it's more of a personality trait, I think, because I think I've always been skeptical of stuff. I don't think that I would have ever been taken in by something like this, however young I was. So I think maybe it's just it's like a nature versus nurture thing, isn't it? I think it's more of an inherent nature.
I think my prevailing kind of belief on it is it's got something to do with like being a contrarian, like having contrarianism as part of your personality. I think that probably most people, they have some opinion or maybe a collection of opinions that kind of go massively against like the mainstream in some way, and that people are kind of like okay at holding those opinions, like not afraid to hold an opinion that most people don't agree with. This actually, when I was talking, do you know Mark Changizi?
Yeah, I've come across him. Yeah.
Right. I had a conversation with him, and I explained it to him there, but just to kind of like briefly go over it. This is a theory of mine, and I don't know whether it's accurate. But that test they do where they say like, okay, here's two lines, and you've got to like say which line is shorter, and they do it in like a group, and there's there's one person who's being kind of tricked, and everyone else is in on it, and they start giving the wrong answer. My theory is that like the people who kind of like smelled the bullshit would pass that test, as in like they wouldn't be willing to say a lie to fit in with the group. But I want someone to run this experiment for me, but like, because at the moment, like I'm speaking it as if it's truth, and it might be total bullshit, but like I want to find out if there's something there.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting, wouldn't it? I think, that's another one as well, isn't it? I have come across that before, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Milgram experiments.
Yeah. Is that the one where they electric shock people?
Exactly that. Yeah. Yes, so they got someone in a room through a glass window, and then there was a scientist telling them to electrocute someone in the next room that they could see. But obviously it was a fake electric shock, but they kept turning up the voltage until the person that was the actor in the other room was screaming in pain, and they were still pressing the button because this guy in the lab coat was telling them to press the button. It's scary, isn't it? How people will just follow authority or perceived authority without questioning it, even if they know it's wrong.
Yeah, it's amazing because, people throw around terms like, being red pilled before this event. And even I use that kind of term, but I never really fully felt what it meant until kind of going through this process. And now I'm like, wow, I can, those kind of experiments that you see and you're like, do people really do that? Or previous crazy stuff that's happened, like Maoist China and, Nazi Germany stuff, where you see people just blindly following authority to, just going off the edge of a cliff in terms of like following authority. And now I don't question it in the same way. I don't have the same kind of like, I don't think of those things and go, oh, okay, like how could that possibly have happened? Now I'm like, yeah, I get it now, I kind of can see exactly how that can happen.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of just played out in front of our eyes, hasn't it, over the last couple of years? And it's been quite an experience. It's actually been quite scary, I think, to see just how much that is the case and how quickly people will just turn and kind of drop all of their kind of almost like their rational senses and just go along with a narrative. Like I find it shocking how compliant the average person was. On all the different measures, whether it was the masks, the vaccinations. I mean, to have gone from a situation where, wearing a face mask would be ludicrous, like to go into a supermarket, to a point where you were told that wearing a dirt, you see these people that had these face masks that had in their pocket for 6 months and hadn't been washed and all crusty and disgusting. They'd put them on their faces and they would genuinely believe that was going to protect them from getting ill. I'm not sure that they genuinely believed it. I just think that they needed something on their face to walk through a shop and to feel that they weren't being looked at or that no one was going to say anything to them. So they just did it, because I'm not sure. I think that most people, they were doing it purely for the compliance reasons. I don't, maybe during that initial kind of lockdown or whatever, but I feel like by the time masks were brought in as like a mandatory thing, most people, they were just doing it for the compliance. That was really it. Yeah, I think the majority of people, I mean, you're always going to have those kind of really neurotic people who really did genuinely believe in the mask. But I think, I do agree. I think for the most part, it was about compliance. And it was about not wanting to be challenged. Most people I spoke to about it who wore them, who didn't agree with them, it was, it's like I said, why are you doing it? And they would say, well, I don't want to get into an argument with someone in the supermarket, or I don't want to be, I don't want to. And that's what it comes back to. People don't like confrontation, do they? Most people don't want to get into a confrontation with a stranger.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, like, this is a kind of weird fear that I think everyone has had at some point, and even I had it. Like I'm someone who normally doesn't really care that much what people think of me, but at the beginning of this whole thing, when I was going into shops and I was unmasked and other people were masked, I got a feeling every single time that I was like, I'm exposing myself. Obviously, like the more times that I did it, it kind of became easier and easier. And by the end of it, I was just like, I just don't care anymore. But, I had to kind of overcome a hurdle there. And I think most people, they think in their head, because we don't think rationally, I guess, about like risk and stuff. And especially, something like social risk, social pressure and stuff. People think you're going to walk into a shop without a mask and they're like, oh, am I going to end up in handcuffs? Am I going to end up in a jail cell? Am I going to end up on the national news and everyone's going to look at me and say, none of that happens. Like what happens is that most people, they at best grumble at you and you ignore them. Like that's basically it, right? Like nothing really happens. The worst that could possibly happen is they try and, tell you to leave the store or something. It's like, it's not the end of the world. Your integrity is worth much more than those very, very small kind of social events that could happen.
Absolutely that. Yeah. And it's so true, isn't it? It's that irrational fear that you're kind of going to be shunned or shamed by in public. And I think it's a funny one, isn't it? Because I was, like yourself, I would go into shops and whatever without wearing a mask, and you'd be the only one in there, and you'd have like, the old ladies in the milk cart kind of twitching and looking at you, and but you just kind of get on with it, don't you? And like you say, nothing happens. No one ever said anything to me, and it was what it was. But some people just couldn't do that because it's just this this inbuilt kind of fear of being called out or being shamed.
Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like it started for humble beginnings for you, but now you've kind of grown to more prominence, and you've got a organization, the Liberty Forum. So I guess let's talk about Liberty Forum for a bit. Like, what's the objective there, and kind of where are you up to with it?
So the objective is very much to raise awareness about, so that the kind of key one we talk about a lot is the World Economic Forum. But generally it's very much just to raise awareness about the kind of this push towards greater centralization and globalist governance. So there is this, whether it's the World Economic Forum, whether it's the UN, whether it's these other supranational NGOs, there is a big kind of current at the moment that is trying to push us down the route of greater and greater centralized governance. So whether that, whatever form that takes, whether it's just at the moment, it's just kind of collaboration between different governments. We saw the Build Back Better. That was the thing I always like to refer to as Build Back Better. Or we had world leaders from different nations all over the world chanting this kind of slogan in unison. It's very, very creepy. But it's this dangerous kind of pull towards this centralized governance that I'm really trying to raise awareness of, and it's the policies that are being pushed along with it. So things like central bank digital currencies, digital ID, this kind of push towards net zero policy. This attack on kind of farming, all this stuff that's being pushed by effectively a governments who are or politicians who are aligned, have been indoctrinated in this kind of like World Economic Forum kind of dogmatic view of how they want the future to be. I can see the danger of it. I can see where we're going. And I think there are a lot of people, in our kind of circles in the freedom movement who obviously are very aware of what's happening. But I think you speak to the average person on the street and they don't know what the World Economic Forum is. They don't know what digital ID is. And you say, you talk about central bank digital currencies and they kind of look at you like you've got two heads. So the objective really is to try and raise awareness of all this stuff, not in a kind of echo chamber of social media, but try and kind of reach the average person on the street and say, look, this is where we're going. What would you say if in 10 years time, you wouldn't be able to spend cash? Every transaction, every penny that goes in and out of your bank account is going to be monitored by the government, and you're not going to be able to have any kind of privacy or ability to choose how you spend your money. It's a scary thought, but it's reaching everyday people, and that's really what we're trying to do with it.
Right. Okay. And because, obviously like you're very familiar with small businesses and stuff, you work with, small business owners, like what is the average person on the street, like outside of our kind of freedom community echo chamber? Like when you say this stuff to them, do they even think that it's a bad thing? Because like, I imagine that most people, unless you have really dug into like the actual ramifications of this stuff, if you tell them, everyone's going to be using central bank digital currencies and, everything's going to be digital, they'll be like, okay, that's way more convenient. It annoys me using cash. I don't like using the cash register or whatever. Like, do you find that people recognize the risks without having to kind of go down the rabbit hole?
Well, that's one of the big challenges. There is a huge amount of apathy, and there is there's a real problem with people not seeing the dangers because they're so they're kind of blinded by the perceived convenience of this stuff, and that's kind of the hard point that we need to get over, and it is about explaining to people why it's dangerous, why having a digital ID linked to a central bank digital currency, what does that actually mean? It's not just be able to walk into a shop and have a computer scan your face and deduct money from your bank account. It's not just about the convenience. It's about the implications of what that actually means and what happens when central bank digital currencies are made programmable, or your money is given an expiry date. So you only have a month to spend it after you're paid. So you're put into, you're being pushed down this road where you're completely and utterly dependent on the state and dependent on large corporations who are aligned with the state. And you before you know it, you can be in a very dangerous situation where you have no kind of recognizable freedom. It's getting people to recognize that. That's the challenge.
Yeah. And are you finding that like people do recognize it, or do you have to sit them down and say, hey, this basically means that if you do something bad or you say something bad on Twitter, that all of a sudden the government's going to say, sorry, you don't have your UBI for this week or whatever it is?
Yeah, yeah. I think you kind of get two responses. You get some people who do actually, when you kind of speak to them about it, they think about it and think, yeah, that, and you can see the cogs turning, and you can see them kind of registering it, and kind of whether or not they're going to retain it and do anything with it, that's another thing. I don't know. But then you get other people who just they just dismiss it and they think, oh yeah, it's just you're just talking nonsense. It's conspiracy. And unfortunately, there are going to be people like that who, until it kind of slaps them in the face, they're not going to believe it. But it's trying to reach as many of the people who are reachable and convincing them that something needs to be done about it. It's about maximizing the people that we can, the opinions that we can change, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I sometimes have this, I mean, really my belief when it comes to this stuff is that I don't think that most people are ever going to get it. I actually think that it's always going to be a minority, but the minority has to be proactive enough in their resistance to kind of like screw the thing up for everyone. It's like, we've got to be the spanner in the works, but I think that it's going to be one spanner versus many, like, unfortunately, because obviously that's going to make it a more difficult task. But I think that I kind of believe that I think it's called the Pareto principle with the 80-20 thing. Like,
yes,
I think that's probably going to apply itself to this situation. Like, most people are going to just be perfectly okay, and they're just going to, kind of sleepwalk into CBDCs and all of the other stuff that's being pushed, and, net zero and everything. They'll just say, okay, whatever. Like, I'm sure my government's kind of figured it all out. But there's going to be a 20% of people that have to, be kind of proactive enough in resisting it to then, break the whole thing. Because it kind of requires everyone, right? It's not like you can just be like, okay, you 20% over there, like, we'll just leave you alone. Like, everyone's got to be brought into the system. It's going to be a kind of, a very unified one world system.
Yeah, I think you're right. No, it's going to be about the vocal minority. And I think with most political things, I think it kind of does work that way, doesn't it? You have a huge kind of section of society in the middle who are kind of on the fence, and they're not really that bothered. They're just kind of living their lives and going about their day-to-day business. And then you've got the people on either side who are very passionate about one way or another. And it's always down to which one of those sides can convince the most people in the middle to kind of vote their way, isn't it? And I think that I agree completely. I think that's going to be the case here. Obviously there's the argument of whether or not this stuff's just going to be railroaded through, regardless of how people vote and what people vote for. That's kind of another.
Well, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, that's another thing, isn't it? But
yeah, we've just seen. I don't know if you saw Rishi Sunak. He did a speech recently. I don't even know where it was. I mean, like, they're all always doing various conferences with just a bunch of, like, evil fuckers. And he did something about he basically was just saying, yeah, we're gonna do CBDCs, and it's gonna, we're gonna do this and that. It's like, did anyone vote for this? I mean, no, nobody voted for him, let alone these totalitarian policies.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? That's that. I mean, if anything that's happened, in the UK political sphere has shown us anything over the last 6 months, it's how little power the Prime Minister or whatever actually really holds against all these kind of agendas. I mean, you had like Liz Truss come in briefly, didn't you, and try and, like, whether or not it was genuine or not, try and push back and put in some policies that were almost at odds with what they were trying to do with the kind of wider narrative. And within 30 days, she's gone. Right. It's whether it kind of makes you think, doesn't it? Are these people actually, that we vote in power? Does it actually make any difference? So are we just voting for a figurehead, effectively, that kind of puts a face on the front of what is effectively a deep state machine that's working in the background? And is all this stuff just going to be pushed through whoever we vote for? A lot of the time, it does feel like that's the kind of world that we're living in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing that I think has become really clear. Like, I think it's almost undeniable at this point that, it doesn't matter who you put there. The agenda is going to stay exactly the same. And, I don't know, because, you've probably got a better idea than me of how many people have a natural instinct to be against this stuff, against like the whole, this whole agenda. I don't know how many people that there are, but I imagine that it's at least a large enough minority, if not a majority, to actually, that you would expect that under a democratic system. I mean, I'm not a huge advocate for democracy anyway. I think that democracy has like a huge amount of flaws inherently, but if you accept that it works to some degree, you would never get these people advocating for these things, or it would at least happen way, way slower. Maybe they'd be, talking about it, talking about it in Parliament here and there, and it would happen over time. But it's almost just like overnight, you wake up, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, CBDCs, we're doing this and we're doing that. And, I think you've probably heard about this thing recently where they want to trial doing essentially kind of climate lockdowns, which we'd been saying was going to happen for ages, and we were called kooks. And now they're trying it in, I think it was, I don't know if it's somewhere around Oxford or something. And they're saying,
Oxford.
They're saying,
Cambridge,
we're going to just lock you in. Oh, in Cambridge.
Yeah, Oxford. Well, it starts with Oxford, and they're effectively what they're doing is they're dividing this kind of wider city area into different districts. It's almost like ludicrous. It's almost like something out of the Hunger Games. They're dividing it into these different districts that you're not allowed to leave more than 100 times in a year. So if you have a car, you can't visit, if you've got a family member or whatever in a neighbouring district, you can only leave your district by car and go into one of the neighbouring districts on 100 occasions a year. So what do you do if you have a job in in a different district? You have effectively you're being forced into a situation where you either don't
UBI,
go,
right?
or
you take the UBI and do what the government says. I think
you take the UBI or get the bus.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. It's almost like they basically just want people now. They're gonna push people so hard and so far that everyone's just going to be like, okay, well, I'll just take the UBI. Then it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, you take the UBI, and now you can't do any of the things you previously could, and you have no freedom. So basically, it's like China. That's going to be the dichotomy a lot of people end up facing, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think I see it as there's two kind of sides of the agenda with this thing here. They're trying to stop people owning cars. The World Economic Forum and the kind of globalists, they hate private car ownership and private travel for kind of us plebs. I mean, it's fine for them to fly around in private jets and be chauffeur driven around in limos or whatever, but for us, we must not have private cars and fly. So there's that side of it. And also, yeah, I agree. I think it's trying to get people to stay at home. It's almost like this. They're trying to create this world, aren't they, where everything's virtual. We've got virtual reality is becoming a big thing, isn't it? It's almost like they want everyone to kind of live in their little micro homes, plugged into a computer with a VR headset on, taking the UBI and not using any of the kind of resources that are going to be saved for the elites, and they're going to live this fantasy life where they kind of continue to fly around the world in private jets and do whatever they want and eat steaks and stuff. Well, everyone else is sat at home eating insects.
I mean, it's actually wild, but it's strange that you have this. If you wrote this into a sci-fi movie, I mean, I know we've had sci-fi movies that are kind of similar, but this almost beats all of them. It's almost crazier than all of them. And this is actually real life. How do you get so many billionaire psychopaths to align on this? Maybe this is something that you've uncovered through kind of research of these guys.
I don't know. It's a difficult one, isn't it? I guess it's like with anything in life, isn't it? I think people it's like birds of a feather flock together, don't they? I think people have a way. It's almost like we have a natural way of seeking out and finding and connecting with other people that are like us. And I guess that's just what's happened over a long period of time. These guys have kind of all found each other, and now they're trying to implement this kind of new world order on us. I think it's something that seems to have happened. I mean, there are lots of different theories, aren't there, around who these people are and what their origins are and all that kind of thing. But it's very much happened over the last 100 years. I think it's something that's kind of tied in with the last industrial revolution and the kind of computer age. You've kind of got this almost like this new wave of billionaires, people like Bill Gates, who have kind of, it's almost like they've amassed these fortunes and they've kind of used the capitalist system to kind of go from kind of zero to kind of people that are controlling the planet. And they want to now pull the ladder up to stop anyone else kind of challenging them. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. It is like that, right? Like it's like they've kind of come to this level of power where they don't want to lose it. And I think that, because here's where I am on my, kind of journey down this rabbit hole. I think that ultimately everything comes down to incentives. Like I think that at the core of this, there seems to be something corrupting in particular about kind of becoming a billionaire, but also it's like they've gone through these various processes, and I think that like fiat money has a lot to do with it, and the way that kind of banking works. These people have found a way to kind of rent seek from the rest of the world, and they don't ever want to give that up. They're kind of like vampires now. They've kind of got their teeth in the global economy, and the only way to keep that going, because we're in this kind of crazy debt cycle, is to basically now become totalitarian. It's now to say, okay, like the only way to keep hold of this, because the debt bubble is going to burst, the only way we can keep our power and not have our heads roll is that we've got to bring in this and that, and we've essentially got to, have everyone under this totalitarian system where if they say the wrong thing, if they try to resist us, they try to resist our power, we can just shut them off, right? It's like kind of weaponizing the entire monetary system against them. That's where I am, right? But I also, I listen to people like James Dellingpole and stuff, and he's like really out there on like they're all devil worshipping like antichrist figures, and this is and you've got people who say it's like the revelation coming true and stuff. I'm not there yet, but I can kind of see it. Like I wonder where you are between those, or maybe you're outside of those boundaries. But where are you on that kind of on that journey down the road?
I think I'm a simpler guy. I think I'm very much of the opinion that it's all, like with most things in life, it's all about money and power. We are, human nature, it dictates it, doesn't it? We're all trying to be the kind of strongest in the jungle, the kind of like the fittest, and we're trying to survive. And I think, for me, it comes. I don't think there's. I'm not, into all the kind of like satanic hand gestures and all that kind of stuff that people talk about. I don't really get that kind of side of it. I just think it's quite simple. I think it's about money and power, and people trying to lock in control over the world financial system, and over what I say a lot is it all comes back to resources. You've got these guys who are in power, and they're obsessed with this. I don't know if you've heard of Malthusian theory, where they have this obsession that as the population grows and the resources reduce, we're very quickly going to run out of resources. And it's these guys that are obsessed with this idea that we're grossly overpopulated, and we're going to run out of resources. They're trying to keep our hands off of the resources, whatever they are, whether it's fuels, whether it's food. They're trying to put us in a box so they can continue to live the lifestyle that they live now, continue to kind of control the financial system, and they can kind of carry on where we're kind of all enslaved effectively. To me, that's what it's about. I don't think that, my view, I don't think it'll ever change. I don't think there's any kind of satanic driving force behind it. That's my view. I'm probably close to where you are in all of those theories. I mean, I do think, like, I do see some of this craziness, like this Balenciaga stuff that came out. Yeah. They keep being proven right. They keep being proven right. The kind of super tinfoil hat wearing kind of people on that satanic thing. I keep being like, nah, that's some bullshit, and then something else happens. I'm like, oh, you had a point, right? But I agree. Like, I don't know if you've read a book called The Sovereign Individual. Have you ever read it? I haven't actually, no.
Okay, right. Like, so in this book, it kind of like goes back through essentially the history of like, how do I even describe it? It's kind of like the battle over property rights in a way. So it's kind of like talks about, how like people had kind of small farms and stuff, and then, they couldn't protect the farms. So then you had people who came and took kind of rents from the people who had the farms and then they said, we'll act as your kind of like defensive force. And then they grew into kind of like larger empires. It kind of takes you right from the very beginning. It actually starts at basically like tribes, and explains like how tribes controlled their territory and, controlled their resources, etc. Then it brings you right up to like the modern day. And it actually predicts a lot of stuff that's happened. But one of the interesting parts of what the book does is it kind of really shows you how the incentives play out in terms of like particularly control over resources, which is like the ultimate incentive for anything. Because if you have control over the resources, you can get people to kind of rent from you. Everyone wants to own the stuff that other people have to rent. This is a story. This isn't like a new thing that suddenly, people have dawned on it and been like, oh yeah, that's, we want to own the stuff and people have to rent from us. This has been kind of like a struggle that's gone on through like the whole of human history, where people have wanted to own the stuff, starting with farmers with their crops, and then start with people protecting those, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have kingdoms, et cetera. And right up until now, and this is just the latest iteration, like we're in the digital age, and now it's like people have seen this new tool, like essentially like digital totalitarianism is now a tool available. It was obvious someone was going to grab it. And, I kind of feel the same as you. And also like, I don't think it's very easy for people to organize under ideologies unless it's kind of like comes from a core basis of human nature. So like the idea of uniting everyone under like Satanism or uniting a big group of people, I just don't think that's realistic. Whereas uniting people under the idea that you're going to control the stuff, everyone's going to rent from you and you're going to have eternal riches. Now that's something you can sell people on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such an important point. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't really understand about the world. Is that there are a class of people who just own everything. There's a very small percentage of the population who own most of the planet's wealth. Interesting statistic: more than 50% of the wealth on the planet is stored in the offshore banking system. And that's all of that is owned by a very small percentage of people, and it's people are so busy arguing amongst themselves, and because they're directed to do so by the people that have all this immense wealth, they're so busy arguing with other effectively working middle class people who earn a little bit more money with them, who they say see as being rich. Someone that works in a supermarket and makes £20,000 a year or whatever thinks that someone who is a lawyer who earns £100,000 a year, they see them as this like really rich person and they're the enemy. But they're effectively the same, in the eyes of someone that owns 50% of a town, and they own skyscrapers, and they have billions of dollars in assets. These people are all the same to them. They're in their eyes, they're just peasants, aren't they? And it's the elites, as I suppose they like to see themselves, kind of more like parasitical, really, aren't they? They've been very clever in setting everyone else against each other and arguing amongst themselves, where they kind of just sit back and, as you say, they own everything. They own the office blocks, and they own the huge amounts of assets that they own. And as you say, everyone else just rents off them, and they sit back and enjoy life.
Totally. Yeah. So just going back to the Liberty Forum for a second. So you started this organization. Who was it started with, by the way? Like, is it your thing, or is there a group of you involved?
Yeah, so it's my thing. So I've got a fair few volunteers now. We've got just under 100 volunteers from various places around the world who are kind of helping with different aspects of it. But it bizarrely, it wasn't something that I planned. So it was something I kind of felt like I needed to do something. I wanted to push back in some way beyond just talking about it. And I tweeted, I think about the end of July, beginning of August. I just put a tweet out saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, of something to kind of push back against the kind of the globalist agenda and the Great Reset, and try and do something to kind of stop it. And the response was just so overwhelming, that I think it was something like 20,000 or 25,000 people liked it within a couple of days. I just thought, wow, well, I've got to do something now. There's obviously so much support for this, and so many people want something to be done, that it was kind of like it was impossible for me not to try and do it. So yeah, that was how it started. It wasn't something that I kind of planned on doing. It was very much off the cuff. So off the back of that, I went and set up a not-for-profit organisation. A couple of days later, started seeking out volunteers to kind of help do some of the promotion, some of the rollout. We've got some outside help doing building a website, and the kind of the development of that kind of side of it, to build a membership system, and it's kind of gone from there, really. Yeah. So it was very much it wasn't something I kind of sat back and strategized about for a long time. And now it's kind of continuing to grow. I think we've got about 21,000 supporters on the site now. And we've got members. It's bizarre. I mean, there's people that are registered from over 120 countries, I think, last time we looked. And, I couldn't even name 120 countries off the top of my head. So it kind of just shows you just how widespread the concern is over what's happening. So that's kind of where it is at the moment, and the kind of goal is to try and keep pushing it out. Obviously, we're going to need a lot of support all over the world. There are lots of ways in which I think we can do that. We want to try and run billboard campaigns in different cities and try and reach people off social media. That's the kind of the crux of it, really.
I was going to ask that. Yeah, what's the kind of main goal? So is the aim to kind of try and get people to understand what we're up against who are not already in the bubble, essentially? Yeah,
that's the aim, because obviously within our circles, everyone fully understands, the red pill, as you say. Everyone understands what the dangers are. They understand, why digital ID and central bank digital currencies are dangerous, because they can lead into social credit systems. And everyone's bought in, everyone's against it, and everyone kind of is shouting about it online. But the problem is, it's only, in the wider scope of planet Earth, that's a very small segment of people when you consider how many people are out there and the kind of wider world. When you look at the entire user base of Twitter, it's only a very small percentage of the 8 billion people on the planet. So it's so the kind of goal of it is, because I think that's the only way that anything could realistically be done, is if we can get enough people in the wider world to sit back and say, hang on a minute, this, I don't want this, and kind of join the kind of pushback, because otherwise it's kind of futile, isn't it? Unless we can reach those people and reach normal everyday people, you're kind of man on the street. There's only so much you can do by shouting into the abyss on Twitter, on social media.
Yeah, totally. So have you had any kind of like big prominent backers or anything like that, or is it kind of just generally stayed very grassroots?
It stayed very grassroots. So I've tried to avoid, like, in terms of financial backing, I mean, it's kind of self-funded really, but in terms of funding it, I've tried to keep it to memberships. So it avoids any kind of political sway or anyone having kind of an undue influence over what we're doing, because I think the way I see it is, if it can be kind of, it's almost like what Elon Musk is trying to do with Twitter, and charging is $8 for verified accounts. When you move a business model to being funded by lots of different users, and the people are actually supporting it rather than, in their case, advertisers, it kind of almost democratizes it, doesn't it? And it removes the situation where a lot of not-for-profits have a challenge whereby a lot of their funding comes from one or two sources, and then suddenly they have to kind of do what these people say, and it kind of shapes the action they take and shapes the kind of the direction that they move in, because obviously they're so beholden by these kind of narrow funding sources that they need to keep. They need to kind of keep them on side, and that's something I want to avoid. In terms of backers, I very much kept it just myself and members.
Okay, cool. So I saw that you were going to be talking as well at the Greater Reset event. I saw your name on the website the other day. Are you doing that in person, or are you doing it remotely?
No, I'm going to do it remotely. As much as I'd love to fly to Texas or Mexico, I'm going to do it remotely.
Yeah, because I'm probably going to be there in person. So I was wondering whether I might see you. Yeah.
Oh no. Oh well. Maybe next time. Maybe next year.
All right.
Yeah. Where are you going? Are you going to the Mexico or to the Texas?
Yeah, probably going to go to the Mexico one, because it's not. I can actually I don't even need to fly there. It's actually like quite close to where I live, so it's about a 10-hour drive, which is long, but for Mexico, it's not. It's not actually that bad, and you can make a bit of a road trip of it. So my plan is to go there. Do you know much about what Derek Brose is doing with the Greater Reset and stuff? I think that he's doing some really cool stuff. So I wonder like how much you've spoken to him.
Yeah, I have spoken to him a bit. Obviously, so Derek got in touch with me when I first started the International Liberty Forum, and invited me to speak at their event, which was very kind of him. I'm looking forward to being involved with it. So, yeah, obviously that was the first I was aware of him and what they were doing. I know they've been around for a few years now, but yeah, I think I actually listened to because you had him on. I know you had him on your podcast. I listened to the podcast.
Okay.
And so I obviously know a bit about his background and kind of from listening to that. But I think it's what they're doing is fantastic, and it's very much something that I'm keen to try and support. I think we've got a lot of similar views on what's happening and kind of trying to push back against it.
Definitely. Yeah. I really love the stuff that he's doing. And, I mean, I actually, when I had that podcast conversation with him, like I intended to talk to him about like loads of other stuff, and I just didn't get through any of it because I just found kind of his personal story so interesting. And he's another great example of someone who has just really kind of like taken everything that's happening in the world and just gone, fuck it, I'm just gonna do my thing to resist it and actually find meaning and purpose in this. And I think that he's absolutely kind of like found his calling really with all of this stuff. And, I don't know whether that's the case for you at this stage with kind of what you're building. It's probably a bit more in the earlier stages, but maybe you'll find as well, like that this is your calling, is to do the Liberty Forum stuff.
Maybe, yeah. It's one of those things, isn't it? I find with most things in life, I've always kind of, I always like to say I've kind of fallen through life in a series of coincidences, and I've never really planned anything that I've done, whether it was my business that I started 10 years ago, or Liberty Forum, all of these things. They've never been things that I've kind of pre-planned. They're just things that I've fallen into, and they've kind of evolved and grown over time. So yeah, maybe the Liberty Forum will be, the same in that vein. Maybe it will balloon into something that kind of overtakes the other stuff that I do. Yeah. I'm certainly very passionate about it, and I think it's very important. And there's obviously a lot of support out there. So yeah, it could well be something that becomes all encompassing, and I leave my day job behind.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what you say there about like going through life, I used to think that wasn't the right way to live, and now I'm very sure that it is, right? Like I used to think that you should be kind of very, very like with everything you do, like super intentional and be like, no, I want this, I'm going to go for it, I'm going to work every day for it, I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. every morning, and I'm just not convinced now that that's actually how like inspiration happens. I kind of think that it's much like now I'm a bit more kind of, I guess, like a bit more woo-woo on the whole idea. I think like if a good idea comes to you and you feel a passion to do something in the moment, and it might start off like really small, because like when I started this podcast, I had the thought, and a week later I'd released the first episode. I just knew, and I didn't know where it was going to go, and I didn't even know that I would kind of fall in love with podcasting or enjoy it or anything like that. I just kind of thought, I'm just going to do this. It feels right, and just kind of winged it, and then just went from there. And so many kind of good opportunities have come from it. Not just obviously like the podcast itself and having like awesome conversations with like people who are doing cool stuff like yourself, but also just like beyond that as well. Like I've had loads of other experiences like in my private life that have kind of evolved off the back of that. And yeah, now I'm really convinced that the best way to go through life is actually to kind of not necessarily to be like absolutely honed in on something that might not necessarily be right for you, but like to be kind of like open to, kind of pulling on a thread of inspiration essentially.
Yeah, I think I very much agree. That's kind of how I like to live my life. I think, what the problem is, there's nothing wrong with kind of working towards something and having kind of a broader goal and broader aims, but I kind of almost like to kind of go with the flow, as it were, on the route to kind of reaching those aims, because sometimes, you go off on a tangent and you find out something that you didn't even know existed, or, wouldn't have even occurred to you is the kind of the right thing for you. And, so, I mean, if I look back at when I started my commercial finance business at the time, I was actually running networking events in London. I was running business networking events. And I was that was kind of the thing I was focused on. And that was my kind of intention, as it were. And it was actually through people that I met at the events I was running, and a random opportunity that came up that we, ended up starting the commercial finance business. And then that very quickly, something that was almost completely random, and wasn't really pre-planned, ended up being something that kind of defined my life for 10 years. So yeah, I'm very much a believer in kind of going with the flow and doing what feels right at the time. Even if it's not necessarily something that you kind of planned and aimed for, because it's, it can lead to amazing things.
Yeah. And also kind of like allowing things to evolve as well. I think like a lot of people, like before they start something, they're like, okay, like I need to be at a certain level before I even begin. It's like, I've got to have all of my ducks in a row before I do anything. Whereas actually I think that like starting something kind of before you're ready and it being like a bit shit in the beginning, like it's fine. Like you can kind of like, you can scale up like when you're ready, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Maybe this is just me kind of like excusing myself for like this location I'm still recording in now. But like, I'm hoping that over time, like, the production like quality and stuff is going to increase. But like, I'm really glad that I didn't wait for that. I'm glad that I didn't wait to like have a studio and stuff and like the best microphone and everything to kind of be like, okay, now I'm ready to do it. I think you gotta start when it feels right and then just kind of like flow with that.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I've always been a big believer in kind of jumping and then learning to fly on the way down. And it's like almost like, the same as, it's better to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission. Kind of all these kind of things that, the same kind of vein, aren't they? I think you've got to just do stuff without giving it too much thought, because when you overthink things and when you wait until you try to wait until everything's 100% right, you'll just never do it. It's better to be 51% sure and then just go for it than try, and do it quickly and make a kind of half-assed attempt and then improve along the way, than to kind of wait forever trying to be 100% perfect and then never do it, because that's what most people do. Most people are too almost like paralyzed by the fear of everything needing to be right before they try.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the biggest barrier.
And also you risk the actual motivation trailing off as well. Like if you don't strike when the iron's hot, like you might just be like, okay, suddenly a few weeks passes by and then you're like, oh, do I do this? And you're like, maybe I still could. And then a month goes by and then 2 months. And then before you know it, you're like, don't really feel that passion I had. Whereas if you start, and especially if you kind of like set yourself a goal and you're like, I'm going to, like for this, releasing the first episode, I was like, well, I've got to release a second. I can't just I can't just pack it in.
You
after
can't
one.
leave it.
And I guess for you, with the Liberty Forum stuff, you made that tweet. Once you made the tweet, you were kind of holding yourself accountable to a degree. It's like, okay, well, I can't just duck out now.
Yeah, exactly that. And it was that was a perfect example of like just jumping into it without really knowing what I was doing. I went from putting out that tweet, and then 2 days later I'd registered a company, a not-for-profit company, and started putting into place all the kind of framework to roll it out. There wasn't any kind of planning. There wasn't any kind of period where I thought, right, I'm gonna sit down for a couple of weeks and kind of work out what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. It was just very much the next day I kind of went about doing it. And I think that's the best way to roll. That's how I like to roll with most things, really.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. All right, cool. Well, it's been like super awesome getting to know you, and thanks for sharing everything about like what's going on with the Liberty Forum stuff. Let people know before we sign this off. Just let people know like where they can find you, where they can get involved with the Liberty Forum and all the rest of it, and any other places that they can catch your work. And also, if you could just like leave people with a parting message as well, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So if you want to find me, the best place to find me, if you're on Twitter, that's where I spend most of my time on social media, is at Matt Gubba. Again, the Liberty Forum you can find on Twitter at Liberty Forum HQ, or the website is thelibertyforum.org. So any of those, if you want to kind of get in touch with me or get in touch with the Liberty Forum, those are probably the best places to go. Passing message is very much, I would say, if you want to do something in life, don't overthink it, do it. Don't get worried about what other people are going to think, because that is the thing that will stop you being happy in your life. I think you're always going to be happier if you just jump in with both feet and do stuff that you want to do, and kind of screw what other people might think of you.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks.